Good afternoon, everybody, and a very, very warm welcome to the launch of the Taking the Temperature series of reports. And this is the first in the series that we're launching this afternoon. I'm delighted that we have a stellar cast of people participating in this launch, all who are really committed to supporting the creative industries in this really difficult time. The British Council in particular has been partnering with FICCI and ArtX Company through the last few months. And in this particular instance, we are looking at the impact of COVID on the creative economy in India. The pandemic, first and foremost is a health crisis, as we all know, but it's also an economic crisis and is having an unprecedented impact on the creative economy worldwide. Since India went into lockdown, the British Council, like thousands of organisations across the country, took to digital platforms. So in our case, that was engaging with partners and customers in English education and of course the arts. And technology in one way or another has proven to be some sort of saviour for us all. So whether we are juggling Zoom meetings like this afternoon, online teaching, various webinars, catching up on concerts, or a whole host of other things, we are all just now kind of more, at least for me, more of a technology buff than I was a few months ago. And by virtue of expanding our digital programming in the arts and festival sector, the British Council has been able to engage the creative community in India, the UK, and worldwide in this really extremely difficult time. So just to give you a flavour of what we've been doing, British Council online arts and culture programming in crafts and festivals has included a real focus on women's empowerment, as we know that particularly in the craft sector, women are hugely impacted actually. So we've been focusing on women's empowerment in craft and design, partnership with India Craft Week, and that has reached over 1 million artisans, crafts organisations, professionals in the creative sector. And also in crafts, our India UK Crafting Futures funded projects have been featured with UNESCO Resilient programmes and Impulse NGO in East India, with many more of these funded programmes to come. In festivals, we've partnered with Folklore, sharing storytelling across Asia, including British Indian actress Indira Varma from Game of Thrones. And I know that was a real highlight for many. June, we know, is Pride Month, and we partnered with the Queer Muslim Project to celebrate the whole month through performances, events, and conversation with the LGBTQI+ community in the UK and India for Pride at Home. And I think that was a really important way of supporting this community while we're all locked up at home in one way or another. Support for women and girls underpins really all of our work at the British Council, whether that's arts, education, or English. And some of you may know we partner with Women of the World, WOW Foundation from the UK, and have had a really impressive series of events across South Asia over the last 2 or 3 years, celebrating women and girls and the difference that they make in our lives, as well as acknowledging the many challenges that we face every day. So last month, WOW moved online and with WOW Global 24. And at that event, writer, philosopher and feminist Angela Davis, said, and I quote, let me read this out to you. Art is a necessity. We need art to illuminate the way to a different future. We need art in order to remind us of our humanity. Artists are our lifeline. They are our hope. They allow us to feel what we do not yet know. Art is essential. And those powerful words go very well with the belief we have at the British Council that culture connects us. And, you know, in solidarity with the creative sector in India, this partnership with FICCI and Artex for taking the temperature reports, through this, we're going to regularly survey the creative industries to provide insight on the impact of COVID-19 on the arts and culture sector. The UK has not been immune from this either, and after considerable lobbying, we got some very, very heartening news from the UK that also gives some backdrop to our discussions today. So the UK government yesterday announced a £1.57 billion package of grants, loans and capital investment to support the creative economy through COVID-19. And that's a package of measures for short-term relief to arts companies and long-term investment in the future stability of the creative sectors. So as we work towards both enabling and upskilling professionals and organizations that comprise the creative economy for the country, it's imperative to look at the solutions that can help the sector survive during the ongoing situation that we're all living through and allow us to see a future for it. So I'm really pleased that we are here to report on this first stage of the findings from the research. And at this point, I'd now like to invite my colleague and Director for the Arts in India, British Council, Jonathan Kennedy, to take us through the headlines of the report. Over to you, Jonathan.
Thanks very much, Barbara. And to echo Barbara's words, our ambitions for arts and culture programs in India is to be a catalyst for creative expression, international exchange, and to strengthen the enterprise economy. And this is a global priority for the British Council, Arts and Culture, as we respond to global challenges. And I can think nothing more challenging than the COVID-19 pandemic, which is why I think our partnership now with FICCI and Artex is a fitful response to the current situation. Just to give you some of the headlines from the research that we have so far, and if you could go to the first slide now, that would be terrific, which is the second slide on the PPT. That's it. And then the slide that follows this one would be great, which covers essentially, there we are, not that one, that one there. Thank you very much. Which covers, in 2017, FICCI and KPMG had commissioned some research which showed the growth forecast for the creative economy in India up to 2018, which valued the quantum of the economy at 275 billion IN rupees. And the craft economy specifically, and separate from the main creative economy as it was split into two areas, was valued at 239.6 billion Indian rupees, with a growth rate forecast at 2.5% for the creative economy and 10% for crafts. That was back in 2017. Of course, we'll also know that earlier this year in May, the Indian government announced the GDP for the past financial year and the past quarter, which in fact in the fourth quarter of 1920 showed a 40% low at 3.1% year on year. This takes India's annual growth for the full financial year to 4.2%, but that was in fact the lowest since 2008. And of course that provides the background from growth to the slowing down economy to the period that we now find ourselves in during the pandemic. And the creative industries face a really uncertain future. Sectors are contracting, organizations are facing up to very difficult choices to ensure that they sustain, and individual professionals are contending with short-term survival and decisions about whether they can afford to continue to work in the creative sector. It's most likely that the creative economy would be very different in the aftermath of COVID-19, and some sectors may be decimated. The research snapshot from taking the temperature surveys seeks to understand the immediate impact on artists' livelihoods, art organizations, their audiences, and responses of governments, NGOs, and major stakeholders to ensure that the sector survives, recovers, sustains, and grows. But at the moment, I think we're probably in the survival stage and haven't quite got to the point where we can look to recovery or growth beyond that. If we now move to the next slide, please, we'll start to see some of the findings from the initial cohort of surveys and reporting, which looks at the micro, small, and mid-sized enterprise economy, MSMEs, who make up 88% of the creative sector, with 22% expected to lose 50% of their annual income in the first quarter. That was up until June of this year. 50% already loss of income of 88% of the SMEs. 53% of events and entertainment management sector has experienced 90% of their business cancelled between March and July. And 41% of the creative sector have stopped functioning during lockdown altogether. We hope that they will regroup and rebuild, but for the time being, 41% have stopped functioning, while 61% of organizations established within the last 4 to 10 years have stopped in that period as well. So longevity and is no guarantee of being able to continue functioning in this difficult time. And it's clear that SMEs, the freelance workforce, and large companies too have been worst hit during COVID-19. Next slide, please. Nevertheless, there have also been some measures taken to support the sector, and when available, short-term financial relief would be used to keep freelancers and organizations viable as going concerns. 80% would use financial support towards lost income, staff costs, and immediate business needs. With cases of state intervention, such as the Kerala government and others, and creative sector help coming from campaigns such as the Staying Alive project, they provide powerful examples of what is possible with strategic support and collective action. Next slide, please. Over the mid to long term, though, 88% of the sector fears social distancing impacting on the creative economy over the long term. The creative sector is made up of innovators who are resilient, adaptable, and inventive. Organizations such as those online with us today and India Craft Week, the JLF Brave New World program, NH7 Weekender, show a spirit of solidarity between artists and audiences to continue to work during lockdown and to connect more widely. However, the short-term impact of COVID-19 on the creative economy globally and in India cannot be underestimated and looks, from the research so far, extremely bleak. So with all that said, I'll hand over now to Pragya Tiwari to moderate the rest of our session this afternoon. Over to you, Pragya.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you all of you for this absolutely marvelous, very timely and very, very crucial report. I will be having a conversation in the context of this report with Sanjoy Roy and Rashmi Dhanwani, and if there is time, I'd also like Jonathan to take a couple of questions from us. But I'd like to start with Rashmi, who's been a very big part of developing this report. The first question I want to ask you, Rashmi. Sorry, Rashmi, are you with me? Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes.
So Rashmi, the first question I would like to ask you before we delve any deeper and talk about how to interpret this report. Why should we even care? Why should we care about this report at all? Why are we talking about the arts ecosystem, to play the devil's advocate, when there is so much else going on in the country? What are your thoughts on why this is an absolutely crucial subject to discuss?
Right. So first of all, I think the problem is we think of the arts as outside of the basic needs. Right? I mean, currently when everybody's locked up at home, what they are actually consuming is cultural content. They are engaging in hobbies and aspects that keep them sane. And arts is a huge part of that. So first is to sort of take this misnomer away that arts is plus in addition to everything that we need to survive. But if anything at all, the pandemic has shown us that that's integral to the way we think of ourselves. We are trying to make sense of this universe around us. And I think that's the first way to think about why should we care about the arts. Then there are more tangible aspects to it, right? Like, for instance, let's look at jobs. In a country like India, we think there is artist as a separate category which needs to be supported. But the fact is, when you look at the broader idea of the creative sector, the cultural sector, and the creative economy, and I'm using these words very interchangeably for a very specific reason, you're talking about all the potential of human beings in this country that are engaging in creative labor. So this spans the musicians, the artists, the craftspeople. And when you combine all of that, that's a huge amount of employability in this country that's actually not just doing this as a part of their cultural, continuing to enliven their cultural heritage, but also as a way to survive, as to, a way to make money. The handicraft sector is the second largest employer in the country. So when you look at these kind of statistics, you can't ignore what this report is trying to tell us in terms of why is it that the art sector currently is so threatened with the pandemic. So we should care for the ability of the arts to keep us sane, the ability of the arts to make us acknowledge what our identity is, to make us see sense in the world, not just now, but generally. Who are we? We know ourselves as Indians or South Asians or Britons because of the histories and the cultures that we hold with us, that our skins are teeming with those stories, those ideas. But also they help us survive, they help us make money, they help us have careers. And that's the data, that's the statistic, which unfortunately is not being captured in this country. We do not have cultural statistics. We do not have a ministry tasked with making sense of the potential of the sector and the value that it adds to our lives, to our economy, to our society. That's where the gap is. And that's why reports of these sort become really important, because they give us a lens with which to view what should be and is dear to us.
Very quickly, before I start to talk about the in-sector interventions that have come up in response to the crisis, you mentioned apathy, you mentioned a certain kind of ignorance in terms of the understanding of the value of the arts and culture sector in different forms. And of course, you mentioned a paucity of data and lack of structure. Do you think that these are also the reasons why the state often fails to intervene in a substantial and sort of effective way to prop up the sector?
Absolutely. I think the Indian culture sector at best can be looked at as an informal sector. And the reason for that is we do not have a unitary culture policy. We don't have a coherent culture policy. We've had culture had its place in various 5-year plans, particularly the first 3 5-year plans, in a very strong way, where culture was seen as a part of the entire nation building process. And since then, it's sort of evolved in very different ways. And I'm sure Sanjoy will talk more about how divided the portfolio of culture is across various departments and across our policy making, because of the nature in which the art was looked at as a function of nation building initially, and then we failed to look at it both academically and policy wise as to how it needs to be supported and grown. So currently, if I'm not mistaken, it's subdivided into 9 different ministries have some part of culture that they're supposed to handle. So there's no central ownership. So on the one hand, you do not have a coherent policy, you do not have data, you do not have statistics. And on the other hand, you do not have ownership. So what that does is it renders us vulnerable. And also because of that, we're not able to make sense of who's included, how are they included, what are the directions for their growth? What is their potential? How do we harness that potential? You also have to understand the unique structure of the sector, right? And the composition of the sector. When you look at the auto industry, you can talk about the 10 biggest auto companies, think about giving them subsidies or any kind of recovery measures, and it's easy to address that sector. In the cultural economy or in the creative economy, you have the structure is such that you will not have mega companies. You'll have some mega companies, a huge amount of freelancers and creative professionals, artists who don't fall into the formal economy context, small and medium enterprises, most of whom work in clusters. So you'll have Bombay as a creative city, you'll have Bangalore as a creative city, you'll have Kolkata, you'll have, Goa. You won't have, SEZs for the creative sector. And that's the structure of how the sector is built. When you do not have an understanding of how the sector is built, how the sector needs to be supported, where do you go give support? So it's both the composition of the culture sector in India that renders it vulnerable, therefore, because their ability to have this sort of longer runway to survive in these times or in any other times, be it tax reforms or be it something like a demonetization, is very short. The runway to survive, to make sense of these mega socio-cultural or socio-economic changes and movements, the cultural sector is finding it far difficult to deal with it. And on top of that, and again, Sanjoy will talk more about that, is the fact that we've not really had a FICCI or a CII representing the sector up until a few years ago. I think FICCI was about 4 years ago, CII was a couple of years ago. So where is the voice? Where is the voice? Where is the data? Where is the academic orientation? And where is the ownership? So these are the big questions that stare at us today.
No, I mean, this is very, very interesting. So I'm going to take another hot minute before we move on to the interventions that I want you to talk about. There is a very blurry understanding. Forget about the state, because of the lack of data and structure, etc. Even amongst lay audiences or lay people, there's a very blurry understanding, at least in my experience, of what the cultural sector in India entails. Could you just, of course, it's a vast landscape and I don't expect you to map the entire landscape out for us, but could you just give us a sense of the diversity and the various sort of components that we speak of when we speak of the cultural sector, including perhaps technicians or people employed by the cultural sector who may not be seen as artists in the strict sense of the word?
Absolutely. To answer that question, first we need to understand, and that's one of the key concerns as well, right? When we think of the arts, we think of Bollywood and we feel Bollywood has a lot of money. And that's the sort of dichotomy that we're always dealing with. In fact, one of the sessions that was recently held, I believe someone from the ministry actually said, but why do artists need a support? The Bollywood should be actually giving in money, to the fundraising efforts for COVID-19, which they did, by the way. There are enough people who have given money into the PM Cares Fund. But the point is not that. The point is, when we look at the sector, what does it comprise of, right? There is, at Artex, when we look at understanding the sector, we offer these three lenses. One is the not-for-profit lens. A huge part of the sector comprises of not-for-profit organizations which cannot have a profit motive. So for instance, and I'll illustrate that with an example, but museums as an example, or theater schools, the education organizations as examples, small theater groups as examples. And I'm giving one genre here, but of course there is dance, music, theater, performing arts, visual arts, literary arts, poetry as a structure cannot be a for-profit context, always. Then you have the for-profit sector, which is the creative sectors that actually have the potential to make money because their ability to scale is much higher. So you would put everything from advertising, design, media and entertainment, events broadly into that for-profit space. And then you've got the state-supported infrastructure, which is the institutions that are set up by the state, which do not fall in this for-profit, a not-for-profit space primarily because they're mandated to be running in a completely different context. So you have to look at the Indian cultural sector in this paradigm. So let me give you an example of how this operates, right? There's National School of Drama instituted by the government. Has been producing an enormous amount of theater and some really incredible actors, theaters, producers, and technicians here in this context. They, from here, probably move into the not-for-profit space. They might be working in theater groups. They might actually have multiple jobs as well. So some of them might be writing for a newspaper, working in the evenings in theater. There's often mixed job economy there as well. But they're living their passion. And some of them also move into the more commercial space of television, advertising, and films. One classic example being SSR, the actor who recently passed away. He came from theater, he trained in an acting school, and then he became a Bollywood star. How do you separate these contexts? So when you look at the cultural sector, you have to look at all of this interplay between human innovation, creativity, technology that actually produces a certain kind of tangible value. Now, the tangible value can be looked at as money, what a Netflix would bring you, or the Bollywood space would bring you. It could be looked at as just the sheer wealth of cultural content that is created, which may not necessarily make money, like the amount of plays that we have, or it could just be seen as a human being trying to live his or her or their full potential of wanting to do something that they're passionate about. It's about how do we articulate these tangible values and what this entire creative economy actually comprises of. It comprises in the trade of these goods and services. And fortunately, and I'm happy to say that, because not all of it is connected with money and employability, and it shouldn't. So that's the overall perspective that we have. None of which, by the way, is defined in India. There is a far broader context in Europe, primarily emerging out of the UK, the broader context of the creative economy and cultural and creative industries. But we formally don't use these as definitions so far in any policy context. So hence the lines are very blurred as well.
Thank you for that, Rashmi. Now, coming back to the immediate crisis that we're in the midst of, and the crisis that the report actually highlights. Because of various reasons, we talked about how there hasn't been enough forthcoming support from the state, but there have been some very sort of inspiring interventions from within the sector itself. The report has a case study of one such intervention called Staying Alive. I was hoping that you could talk us through maybe Staying Alive as an example, as a case study of one such interventions, and highlight a couple of others and what they've managed to achieve and how they've managed to do so.
Sure. So broadly, when you're looking at sort of support, well, first of all, what's been happening is that it's the culture sector that's bootstrapping its survival, because you've got no state support so far. There hasn't been a formal statement that I know of, again, that has spoken about support for the sector. I'm going to go into the international examples later, but broadly, when you look at any kind of support for the arts, you can look at it from three categories, right? You can look at it from the category of recovery. How do you help these cultural organizations, institutions, artists recover from what they're dealing with right now? You can look at emergency funding as a second layer. And the third layer is, how do you enable them to continue to make work in this space? So what are you doing in the digital domain as a state in order to enable them to do that? And there are various countries that have looked at all of these phases and different waves of funding. In India, we do not have the state looking at funding of this sort. So it's the culture sector that's trying to make sense of where the gaps are, what the needs are, where the emergencies are, and is bootstrapping to survive. One major area in which they are doing that is fundraising initiatives, and that's where Staying Alive falls in, but Staying Alive is a little more than that. I'll talk about that in a second. The second area that you see is generating awareness and information through data and research, which is what we are trying to do here with Taking the Temperature. But there are a lot of small initiatives that have been occurring over the last 3 months. I know that EMA, the Event Management Association of India, had done a couple of surveys. We at Artex had done a smaller survey, which had about 50 or 60 responses. This was in the second or the third week of the lockdown. So there are smaller organizations that have been doing these surveys to understand what the issues are. But British Council, the TTT report is actually one of the more formal ones that we have seen, with far more visibility and a structured research methodology that taps into understanding what are we trying to measure and why are we trying to measure it, with a clear methodology. So there is creating awareness and information. There have been a couple of pages that have also come up that that allows for sharing of resources and information, because information is power in these times. So what are the art funds in operations? How do I get access to it? How do I make sense of what is going on? And the third is creating new formats and platforms for performance-driven arts, which has also happened in India. So there have been for-profit companies and ticketing platforms that have created contexts and spaces for cultural organizations to continue to make work. So these are the three ways in which you've seen the different kinds of initiatives that have occurred. But I'm going to mainly talk about the fundraising initiatives. A big one has been, there are three that I'm going to talk about. One, of course, is Staying Alive. Staying Alive, as the VGs go, we are trying to stay alive. And the whole idea of doing that was there were about 8 cultural organizations spanning, spoken word, commune, geometry and compass. There is Big Bang Music. So a lot of music, live performance-based organizations. Insider.in was on it. We've been a partner in the campaign. And the whole idea of this entire space was to educate, inspire, and support artists. And we were going to do that through Educate by creating digital events that would help artists understand and upskill during these times. Inspire was supposed to use arts to talk about how we can deal with COVID-19. So using music and dance and theater to pass on key messages about COVID-19. And the third part was supposed to be support, where we were going to be using all of these efforts to raise money for live performance artists and create an emergency fund. As far as we know, this was the first and so far only emergency fund that has been established. And the idea is to invite applications from artists across the country, across the live performance domain. So there are 13 subsectors within that, including mime and illusion and magic, but also music, dance, theater. And the idea was to give grants of up to 20,000 rupees, which act as emergency funding. This could be in full cash grants, or it could be third-party payments. So we've actually paid out rent, pending rent, electricity of artists. We do not pay groceries out. That's completely on how the artist wants to take care of it. But this is how we've been trying to support the community. The form is right now out in English and Hindi, and that's another complication, right? In a country like India, how do you create that kind of access with so many languages? And you always feel like someone will be left out. As a part of this, we've also created a clear panel structure. So there are about 8 or 9 panelists drawn from, of course, the groups that are organizations that are part of the initiative, but also from the academia and from the social impact space and people who have been giving funds out. So it's a very thought through way of looking at who's the panel, how are they taking decisions, how objective are we in taking these applications and evaluating these applications, but also maintaining privacy. So we actually have a legal firm, Priyanka Khemani and Associates, who are a part of, who've guided us on privacy policies around this, because I'm sure, and these are other key concerns, right? Artists don't like to ask for money. They really value what they do, and they're not here for handouts. So they don't want people to know that they're in need. And that is a major concern that we're dealing with. The entire mental health concerns around what this pandemic has brought about is another area. So while putting this fund together, we had to think about how do we deal with those access issues? How do we ensure and maintain privacy? So all of these standards have been put in place, and every 15 days we release a cycle. The cycle is open for 10 days, and every 3 weeks we release funds for about 5 to 10 grantees. So far, we've completed 2 cycles, and there have been about over 100 applications, and about 10 grants have been dispersed in 1 month. But this is like a fraction, a drop in the ocean. When you're seeing, the report gives you an example of a sense of how vast the problem we're dealing with it is. So that's what we've done with Staying Alive. A couple of other initiatives, I hope Sanjoy is able to talk about it, is Art Matters, which takes a slightly different stance, where no questions asked, they're giving bits of grants out to artists, giving ration packets out, and there's another kind of support for the artists. The other campaign, the campaign for artists affected by disasters, which is led by Shubha Mudgal, the India Foundation for Arts, and a couple of other organizations, Anish Pradhan, her partner as well. And their approach was very different. What they did, and they were actually one of the first movers, right? With the clout that she has and the work that she's been doing for so many years, creating an equitable space for the arts, they were able to round this up very quickly. India Foundation for Arts is actually one of the few independent art funding bodies in the country. So they all got together and they said, we're going to raise this money, which is 35 lakhs, and we're going to disperse this to 10 organizations, which are in non-metros. So they looked at a smaller organization in West Bengal, something in Kerala, which are not in the metros. And they divided this 35 lakhs up, I think 3 lakhs per organization. And they then dispersed it to other, about 10 to 20 to 30 to how many they could manage artists within their community. So this was a completely different way of working, and a very successful way, I might add, because there is no playbook for creating this kind of funding in this country. I don't think there's been a single artist emergency fund that has been created. So everybody, all of us, are creating or I wouldn't say reinventing the wheel because the strategies are so different, but are sort of creating the templates of what the government could adopt should it choose to in terms of creating support. So these are some of the initiatives that have been happening. What you can see is it's top heavy in the sense organizations that have the longer runway are coming together to then support the bottom layer as much as possible. But keep in mind that there is no access to data. There is no understanding of what more can we do to percolate deeper. So all of this is happening through conversation, through a current understanding, and through just making sense of how the situation is evolving so fast. So these are the 3 examples that I wanted to share. I'm happy to share the links later as well.
Thank you, Rashmi. I would like to talk to you about the possibilities of what can be done over and above what has been done. But before I do so, I would like to bring Sanjoy in to ask him a couple of questions. However, I believe the session was supposed to be opened by Mr. Dilip Chenoy, who is the Secretary General of FICCI. I believe he is here with us now. Finally, he was delayed earlier. Mr. Chenoy, are you with us?
Pragya, I wouldn't want to intervene. I think just go on to the questions with Sanjoy. I'm happy listening and learning.
It would be great, sir, if you could just give us a couple of comments. You've been through the report and FICCI's been an integral part of it. So before I go to Sanjoy,
okay.
It would be lovely to hear from you.
All right. Okay, Pragya. So I think let me first begin by actually saying that, it is as everybody has mentioned, tracking the impact of COVID on the creative sector in India. It is for the creative professionals and art companies and sector support organizations. It's the first report of 3 of surveys. We are actually going to look at the other parts of the country. But before I touch upon that, many organizations have come forward to support this initiative. The Craft Revival Trust, EMA that you mentioned, Events and Entertainment Management Association, the Crafts Council, Japan Foundation, India Arts and Culture Resource, as also the International Council on Monuments and Sites, and a few more. Of course, the Taking the Temperature survey will be available to complete, and I think Rashmi also mentioned the challenge of languages. So we will be trying to do it in Hindi, Bangla, Malayalam, Telugu, Kannada, and Tamil. A very warm thanks to all the supporting partners. But I would like to make just two actual comments there on what I heard, Rashmi so ably articulate on this. I think the first thing is that, it's easy to reach the organized sector, right? Whether it's the 5 institutions in the non-metros or whatever it is, right? And it is extremely difficult to actually reach the unorganized and the widely dispersed sectors here. The second challenge, which I believe is, if you look at the unorganized sector, normally, many of the arts, and Rashmi also did mention it in her comments, that some are primarily dependent on the arts. For some, it is a second kind of a passion, and I think it will be the better word to use there. And only a few states like what Kerala has, or other examples that have been done in the report. I think the first thing that we would like to do, and really, is to take these examples of states, document them, and actually put it to all the other states to replicate. That's the first thing that I would coming out of this report, and I'd like to do. The second is, like they have done for street vendors. Okay, it's not a grant. It's a kind of a loan which is available for them to restart their businesses. It's 10,000 rupees to each, and a system. If we can actually create this and and look at it and replicate this at the state level for the arts community, right? For them, of course, Rashmi also used the survival phase, and then the revival, and then of course there'll be a thriving phase. But if we can actually enable that to happen, this will be a very positive thing going forward. And finally, I think if we can take the case studies, and while one is mentioned in the report, Rashmi spoke about 5 others, right? If we can just document how local communities could come together and support this, and widely disseminate it in different languages and find champions who could actually take this on, that itself will be a big step in this direction. And whatever we can do from FICCI under Sanjoy's leadership and working with all of you and the British Council and Barbara and all, and start looking at it, we'll be happy to do that. So this is only the few points I wanted to make, but like I said, I am really a very strong proponent of this sector, and and I believe that this sector needs to grow. Just incidentally, this morning we had the inaugural of eFrames. Frames is also part of this sector. It's actually film. We don't understand that frame stands for films, radio, advertising, meetings, events, and shows, media events and shows. So it also includes the cultural sector. And they talked about their last year we hit 25 billion. This year they're saying if we make 19 billion, we'd be lucky. So I think it mirrors the kind of things that, and a lot of the issues that you actually talked about were also being discussed there. So thank you for this opportunity, and Pragya, back to you and Sanjoy.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Sanjoy, over to you now. Before I sort of ask you to get into the meat of sort of interventions, possibilities, etc., I would like your quick comments on two things that Rashmi has already spoken about. One is the difficulty of actually producing reports such as this, given the paucity of data and lack of structure. How dire is it? What kind? How does it sort of further compound the challenges within the sector? And why should we all of us, even those who are outside of the sector, really care about this report and what becomes of it?
Thanks, Pragya. And just again, just to congratulate British Council, Barbara, Jonathan, and of course, Artex and Rashmi for having done this very vital report in today's context. So as you know, Pragya, the problem with our sector, the creative and the cultural industry sector, is that we fall not between two stools, we fall between many stools. And because we fall between many stools, we are nobody's baby. There's nobody who's responsible for our sector. Neither do we come under INB, nor do we entirely come under Ministry of Culture. Publishing and literature come under HRD. Handicraft and handlooms come under a different thing. Industries is part of it. MSMEs are part of it. And as you rightly and Rashmi rightly said, so how does any of these ministries sort of actually create or focus on providing any kind of help to this sector, as for example, Britain has done not once, but twice. I mean, Rishi Sunak twice over in 2 lots of interventions has been able to help the creative industry sector, because it is recognized in Europe and in UK and in America and most of the world as one sector contributing, as an example in the UK, 18% of GDP. Our sort of rationale here is that our understanding of the sector is somewhat poor, because 70 years of independence, we have not gone out and done a census which asks as to whether a primary or a secondary source of income comes from this sector. And like you posed the question to Rashmi, Pragya, so what is this sector? And this is something where I've always invariably, and Dilip will know, we've come up against a wall because there is no understanding of what the sector is. So until unless we alienate that, it includes the Ragi in the Gurdwara, the Baul singer in Bengal, to the person who's making the Ganesh Murtis for Ganesh Chaturthi coming up, or the person who's doing the flowers from Newmarket, Calcutta, or the Chandanagar lighting designers, or the Pandal makers, or the Bharatnatyam dancers, or the weavers, or the people who are picking cotton to be able to make the thread which goes into dyeing, which then goes onto the loom. And those people who are creating instruments, those people who are working on leather to create the skin of the sector is vast. And we do not, at any point of time, give it the kind of credibility and credence that it is required. Why is it that 4 or 5, whatever years ago, I went to FICCI, to the then Secretary General, they said, we contribute to jobs, we contribute to economies, we create opportunities which are impossible to value. It's all very well to carry on talking about our ancient civilization and our tradition and all of this kind of, blah, blah. But unless you put your money where your mouth is, this will die. Today, you are expecting, as I saw recently, the weaver or the potter to go leave his work and go break stone. So what will it do to a generation? Remember, it takes 1 million movements to be able to develop muscle memory. So it means that person who's worked on the weave or on the potter's wheel has worked year on year. It's like the Odissi dancer or the Bharatanatyam dancer or the sitar player who has practiced again and again and again and again. So when you throw the clay on the wheel, how does it come out perfectly? It may take 5 seconds or 5 minutes, but it's 30 years of his or her training and generations of the DNA of the artist that's imprinted in them that allows the possibility of doing that. And what you're doing is destroying that. And by destroying that, you are destroying veritably, not just the sense of culture and tradition, but you're destroying the very fabric of what brings us and binds us together. If you all remember in Bengal, when Britain, apologies, Barbara, but this is history, when Britain decided that they wanted to destroy the textile industry of Bengal, which had really become the leading export to the entire world, meaning there were problems in Brazil, in Mexico, in UK, etc., because of the kind of weaves that were going out and fabrics that were going out of Bengal. They went out and systematically destroyed it. So how is this any different? By not providing that kind of support, this is what we're doing. Therefore, we need to, and I think both the arts community and Rashmi, therefore it's very important for organizations like yourselves working in policy, British Council bringing to bear, I mean, yes, sure, you can say it's the foreign hand and all of this kind of stuff, but truly, why is it important? Because they're bringing to bear the experience that they've had over time, where they have been able to distill and understand the importance of the creative sector and be able to create jobs, not 1 or 10 or 100 or 1,000, but in tens of hundreds of thousands, which is why the economies of these countries, whether it's Britain or Germany or France or UK or USA, etc., are looking to this sector. And most importantly, as I keep saying to my colleagues at FICCI, why do we need to encourage artists in the arts community? For one reason only, that they bring about innovation. They are inspired to not necessarily think outside of the box. They are inspired to move the box. And having moved the box, they show us a new way to be able to create new opportunities. And those new opportunities could be as simple as, designing this, or designing a phone, or making a better pen, and so much more. We don't get it. Arts around us, not just what you see on the wall behind me, but look around you. The furniture that you're sitting on, the chairs that you use, the desktop, the computer screen that we're using, the processes that we design. All of this is part of the creative industries. And if we don't get that, there's no point us saying, we are going to be this next great, whatever, superpower at $10 trillion, if you're not being able to inspire that person who has that kind of talent. And we've seen it. I mean, just yesterday, I got a photograph from our kids at Salam Balak Trust. And remember, these are kids who are illiterate, run away from home, blah, blah, blah. We have an arts program going for them. I can't tell you the beauty of what they've created, the ideas that they've come up with, the processes that they've invented. So you create a common playing field for all people by allowing them to realize their basic potential. And the arts is able to do that. The arts does not know one truth. It knows many truths. It allows all of these truths to coexist. It allows every tradition, culture, language, dialect, form, food, fashion, clothing to collectively express themselves. That's why it's important for the arts to be around. But we need policy. We need empirical evidence. We need to drive forward this economy in the creative and cultural sectors, because that's where your tomorrow's jobs are. That's the fastest sector that's going to be able to reignite itself, according to every report. Look at Deloitte, look at BCG, look at KPMG. All of them have said media and the creative and cultural industries will come out first. Media may sort of have much more of a problem because they won't have access to funds, but the entertainment industry and the cultural industry, creative industries will. So focus on it. There's no point telling, a person telling Dilip and me, oh, supposing Sanjoy, you come to us for a grant, how do we know whether you're the artist or not? I mean, get over it, find a policy, and that's not so difficult to do.
Sanjoy, I mean, arts, culture, and creativity are not just the essential DNA of the past, but also the essential DNA of the future, like you very, very coherently and cogently said to us right now. And even so, tragically, we tend to think of this sector and everything that it encompasses as superfluous, as luxury, particularly because there is this idea we are a poor country and relatively poor country, and we have so many needs, education, healthcare, so on and so forth. We are not being able to give adequate fiscal stimulus in all directions. But from the work that you've done and from some really good examples that we have, even in India, be it Kerala or to some extent Rajasthan, we know that interventions by the state, by the government are possible without sort of any other massive opportunity cost, because this is the essence of policy design. It's about the creativity with which you come up with a policy rather than simply throwing money at the problem. Could you tell us a little bit about the financial interventions that are possible and that you would recommend to states at this point in time?
So Pragya, I just want to go back to the first part of what you said again, and just once again spotlight the fact that, say, look at Bengal, where Durga Puja and everything that goes with Durga Puja, the pandal makers, the lighting people, the flower people, the people who create the murtis and the sales, it is the single largest contribution to Bengal's economy. Not car manufacturing, not steel, not coal. This is the single largest contribution. So the minute you look at that, there's no point us turning around and government saying, oh, we're a poor economy. Sure, you're poor. What have you been doing for 70 years? But we can come to that separately. But we are rich in culture and tradition. From cradle to grave, that's what we know. We can sing, we can dance, we can tell our stories, we can perform. And that celebration, or what we call celebration, which is in every street corner, every a nook and cranny of this country, that is what propels our economies. Why is it that every company wants to release their new car, their new garments, their new perfumes, their new whatever in the festive season? Because that's when people go out to be able to create demand and they go out and buy their stuff. It's as simple as that. You have to look at the entertainment and the creative and cultural industries in a completely different perspective. And therefore, to answer the question that if the problem at hand, and it is the problem at hand, how do you kickstart demand? So we have been in lockdown for whatever, 90 days. You will continue to open up cities, countries, etc. But we all know sitting in this room that unlike what was earlier thought, that on 15th of May, there'd be an understanding between India, Pakistan, India, China, and COVID would then sign a peace treaty and retreat to wherever it had come from. Well, it ain't happening. And COVID isn't asking for an e-pass from, Gurgaon or Noida or wherever it is to travel. It will travel. As long as the world is connected, and it is, as long as transportation continues to have it, COVID will continue. So what do? You have to be able to kickstart demand, because without demand, the economy per se will die as we're seeing it. Today, because of the lockdown, you're not seeing the kind of effect that it should be, but you have shown us the kind of annihilation that MSMEs and the creative industries will face. But we know that's true from across sectors, barring, say, big pharma, insurance, food and beverages, etc. The rest of the sectors will die. So in order to kickstart demand, you have to create opportunities. And those are not difficult to be able to devise. Yes, of course, you're giving loans, you've provided MSME opportunities, so on and so forth. But these are loans. Loans are not going to kickstart demand, right? And in fact, John Ralston Saul very intelligently, day before yesterday on JLF's Brave New World, said to Manjushri Thapa, he said, listen, every country is printing money. That's a fact. Every country is taking on debt. That's a fact. Every country's economy realizes that the need is now. Why has the UK put out $1.5 billion into the creative industries? Why has Germany put out $5 billion euros into the creative industry? Because they know that 6 months later, they'll have to put in 3 times the amount of money, but that industry and sector will be dead. It'll be over. So what do you need to do? You need to, as he said, as he suggested, get all the rulers, all the leaders around a Louis XIV table, sign a document that says, I promise to pay back, blah, 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 all of this money in 250 years, and put that document into the Louis XIV wonderful drawer, lock it, throw away the key, and pretend that 250 years later, nobody will be alive, best of luck. Because that's all it is. It's about printing money, it's about signing documents. But if you do not understand the need of the moment, how will you do that? And the need of the moment, again, I'm going back to the need of the moment, is to kickstart demand. And to be able to kickstart demand, you need to first and foremost tackle fear. You need to tackle hatred. You need to tackle paranoia. You need to look at mental health. And all of that is possible very easily through the creative and cultural industries. And in being able to do so, we have said, we've given, on behalf of FICCI, we've sort of reached out and given 3 or 4 different possible solutions, knowing fully well that the government is cash-strapped, so on and so forth. So easiest we've said is that, listen, you've got some money saved because you haven't done work for the first quarter of this financial year. Why doesn't the Department of Culture and all of the other departments pool that money in and say every artist, rural, urban, semi-urban, etc., comes to a government theater or space or whatever it is, which is set up by government to be able to record them and put it out on the Government of India website, celebrating the arts, and in return, paying those artists and artisans. Why is it that the state Emporia, using the money that it has at hand, why can't they acquire from across the firmament, so textiles, pottery, blue whatever, Falaudi, in a democratized way from master weavers and get them to upskill, etc., products, and keep them on tap, open them up online so that everybody can buy. The third thing that we can do very easily is through these zonal districts or the zonal cultural centers. What is it that we've said? That sure, there are enough organizations who are registered with the different state government institutions, dance companies, theater companies, blah, 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 release their grants, which they have promised to do. But also all of those independent artists, the independent technicians, independent artisans, all of these people, register them, see what is the best possible way to help. Can they become part of the Ayushman Bharat scheme? Can we make health available to these artists and artisans? Why is that rocket science? I mean, why is that so difficult? Like you're doing for the MG Narega scheme, can artisans and artists get access to the same amount of money, 200 rupees a day or 250 rupees a day, to do what they do, which is weave, create their pottery, do whatever. Can they get that money? That will help them, and do it for 300 days or 200 days or whatever you've agreed to do it. Why is that not possible? So these are existing schemes that you just lock into. That's all we are saying. Please help the artists. And, you know, no artist is interested in charity. Nobody's interested in charity. Keep your charity. We don't want your charity. The arts sector doesn't need charity. You're not doing us a favor. This is our right. This is our need of the moment. We are doing this to be able to help the economy and the country and its culture and its tradition and everything else. Pay our dues. That's all we're saying.
Excellent.
Sorry for ranting.
I was just going to say, if with a spokesperson like you, I feel optimistic about the arts and culture sector. Really, genuinely, thank you for that. I hope people are listening, because I think we're at a place where if we delay listening, then the consequences could be very, very dire. I've just been told that I have just 10 minutes left. I would like to bring in Jonathan once again, if he's still with us. Jonathan, can you hear me?
I can.
Excellent. So, of course, you gave us a wonderful introduction to the report and to the Arts Council. But to begin sort of where, to end where we sort of started, I thought I'll send a couple of questions your way. And to begin with, I would like to ask you what prompted you guys to think about putting together a report like this. I mean, we've seen from Sanjoy's and Rashmi's comment how vital this report is, how important it is, and how critical it is. But what made you want to be a part of this, to take the temperature of the creative economy?
And I think it's the long view, but the very short-term impact. So whilst we understand, as Rashmi and Sanjoy have expressed so eloquently, the long history of culture and heritage in India, we also know that when you hit this point of crisis, that this absolutely is a global crisis in terms of the impact on the global economy and then the creative economy. We wanted to see, well, what does that mean on the ground in India? And how can we use some of the expertise that we know and some of the processes that we have to hand from the UK to help just start to understand what this means. We haven't got the big picture yet. We're only just starting on this route. And given that there are some gaps in terms of the data that sits within India, nevertheless, we know that the creative economy in the UK, as Sanjoy says, is enormous. It's worth £111 billion a year. That was in 2017. So £1.5 billion package announced yesterday is because the government knows this investment is about staving off what would be a further deeper crisis for recovery if it wasn't done now. And that the value to the exchequer of the creative economy to the UK is substantially bigger than that investment. So it's important to deal with the situation in the moment of the crisis, because to delay too long will make things harder to recover. So that's kind of why we kind of see the long view and the short view in terms of why we wanted to work with FICCI and work with Artex to really sort of understand what's going on and then support what could happen next.
Excellent. Jonathan, now the Arts Council has, of course, we've talked about the interventions from within the sector. We've talked about some examples of interventions by the state, despite the sort of challenges that that comes with. British Council, the Arts Council, of course, has also been in this for a very, very long time. It's been supportive of the arts and culture sector in India and has done quite a bit to further its interests. I just wanted to get in, Barbara, of course, spoke about this a little bit earlier when she spoke about the work of women and children. She spoke about the, so for example, partnership with the Queer Muslim Project for Pride Month, etc. But I just wanted to get your thoughts in on how the kind of work the Arts Council has been doing, and particularly through this crisis and onwards, what are the directions in which you are thinking where the support to arts and culture is concerned in India?
Sure. Well, I mean, our main programs are focused in two areas, really. One is crafts and one is festivals. Festivals, partly because when I first arrived and I was looking at lots of research that had been undertaken, in fact, one was key by Artex and one was the FICCI KPMG research. It showed the growth in the creative economy in the past few years in India and its scope for further growth including in festivals. So that was a kind of, and I could see that if you are a young festival, there is risk that in your first 3 to 5 years, you could implode. And therefore, how can we strengthen that sector? By using expertise from within India and in the UK to sustain the festival sector in particular. And then the vastness, as Sanjoy has expressed, of the craft sector and the need to strengthen livelihoods as well is an important part of where we can see, where we can make some solid interventions within the British Council. So we are focused very specifically there in terms of skills development and capacity building for those 2 areas in particular, because we can't do it all. So that's why we focus on those 2 areas, that we can see that we can bring expertise in India and the UK to bear to really strengthen both sides by way of mutuality. And if we think about just another kind of point regarding the Arts Council in the UK, which is not the British Council, but Arts Council in the UK, when it adapted its grant programmes in March, April of this year to meet the needs of the moment in terms of COVID-19 for the sector, it adapted all of its usual programmes for emergency relief for the arts sector in the UK. And I was just looking this morning, to date, on top of the current 600 plus organisations that they fund year after year, that they've been able to sustain by giving some new investment to over the past few months, they've also added investment to individual artists and new companies in this time, 9,666 in England alone. When you then look at Wales, Creative Scotland, Arts Council of Northern Ireland, that investment from the arts councils really starts to underpin that thing of survival. I think we all know that some organisations probably won't survive the situation in the UK either. But without that kind of collective support, it's going to be very hard to see how sectors in India could also get through this very difficult time.
Thank you, Jonathan. This has been a truly enlightening session. I can speak for myself. It's been very, very invigorating in very, very dark times. Unfortunately, we're almost out of time. So I'm just going to end this wonderful session by saying thank you, of course, to FICCI, to Artex, and to British Council, to all of the speakers here, to everybody who's worked on this report and who has come up with this report. Because like I've said before, and it bears to be said again, it's an extremely vital document, and I hope that it will go far and wide. But this is not the end of it. Coming forth is the next cycle of taking the temperature surveys, which will be available online in English, but also in Hindi, in Bengali, in Tamil, in Malayalam, in Kannada, and in Telugu. The partners would like to thank the Craft Revival Trust for the translations of the survey, as they aim to reach more of the creative sector across the country through different languages. The partners will also be working on a series of roundtables to use learning from this report, from taking the temperature reports, to strengthen policy dialogue with the creative sector during and beyond COVID-19. And of course, the first Taking the Temperature report is now available to download in full from the partners' websites, including from www.britishcouncil.in/programs/arts. I really hope it's a wonderful, very coherent, very easy to read, and very, very important report. I hope you will download it. I hope you will read it, and I hope you will share it. Thank you for listening to us, and thank you for talking to me, all of you.